do car companies change? Let's just look at it's a question which I ask a lot, and you may say the standard answer, which is stuff happens over time, designs modernize, people have different needs, and the car companies change to adapt. And yeah, that's serviceable, but how? Let's look at Mazda, for example. How did Mazda go from being Ford in a trench coat, your average, just average family car, yada yada yada, like the Mazda Tribute and stuff like that, to still making those normal cars, but making them faster, making them better, designing them more sporty, being efficient, cheap, being able to run with the best of them, of the Toyota Corollas and Honda Civics, but being better at the driving feel, being fast, being quick, and then, in the end, weirdly transitioning to modern Japanese, almost luxury, well-designed thing that they're doing now. How did it change so vastly, so rapidly? And the thing is, catalyst cars, that's how things change. Catalyst cars are essentially everything you want the brand to be summed up into a car. So for Mazda, it was stuff like, it wasn't just one car, like it usually is with Toyota. It was stuff like the Mazda Miata or the Mazda 323. Small, cheap, fun drivers, just really good cars. And then later on, you had the CX-7s and stuff like that, which really up-leveled Mazda into the luxury which it is now. Cars which essentially sum up what you want the brand to be, what you want the brand to do, and what you want them to stand for in one singular car, rather than changing the entire lineup. It's also useful because you can see if people like it or not. And with Mazda, they loved it. Let's go back to the Toyota example. The 2005 to the end of 2006 Toyota Camry was a car of the bygone era. It was essentially a reskinned 1990s Toyota Camry. It had the same sticky outy front bumper and the sticky outy rear bumper. It was a little bit more styled and sculpted with the weird little, cat-like headlights. But other than that, it was essentially just the same car with a little bit different body lines and extremely, extremely similar proportions. Even pretty much the same interior. Meanwhile, the 2006 and 2007 Camry, that generation, was crazy. It wasn't better, it was just different. Instead of being long and wide with sticky outy front and rear bumpers, it was metropolitan, it was combined, it was all in one. You couldn't see the bumper, you couldn't make out the individual parts of the car. The interior was widened, not as long. Everything was different. The interior was different. It was saying a different thing. It drove differently. It was essentially, and it wasn't that much different, but the core ideas were so different, it felt like the beginning of a new generation, because of course it was. But not just a new generation of the Toyota Camry, because, the 2005 was just like the 1990, but a new generation of Toyota. And what started this new generation? The Toyota Prius. The new generation of new powertrains. Stop thinking of sportiness as a little bit new rims. Start thinking of V6, like actual performance, fun, like the Gazoo Racing, which would eventually turn into it, more chunkier, like a brand new design, alternative powertrains, the new generation of Toyota in the 2010s. And all of that was in the Toyota Prius. It was all baked in. The Prius was wider instead of being longer. The Prius was chunky. You couldn't make out any of the bumpers. Everything was self-contained. The body lines were smooth. There was never a body line like the 1990s Toyota Camry, which would just be put in there, or pinstriping or stuff like that. It was all contained. It was like a composite. It felt like a car that was made out of Play-Doh. And that's what Toyota wanted for their future cars. The Prius essentially summed up what was down the road for Toyota, and a lot of people saw that coming. So now let's look at one of the largest changes that ever happened to a car company in history. The change in Volvo. How did Volvo go from the 850 platform, boxy cars all the time, semi-electric, they're okay cars, they're just very boxy, they're identifiable, to the newer, modern-day Volvo, which is hybrid, kind of like Mazda, but, Swedish. Like, clear identity, very driven, very confusing, and yet so understandable and so luxurious. How, possibly, could they transform from one to the other? And the answer is not time. And the answer is almost entirely, for a catalyst car, the Volvo C70, or at least the most material, the most material catalyst car that Volvo produced, because they produced a lot of concept cars during that time as well. I mean, any company would once they're switching from an old design philosophy to a new one. So today, let's talk. So buckle your seatbelts for a good old story like Desperate Housewives, Better Call Saul, or Breaking Bad. A story about how people, or in this case, car companies, change slowly over time with catalyst cars, things happening to them, causes, and events. So let's start at the beginning of the story, shall we? We begin in 1991. Volvo equals box. Volvo is an entirely independent Swedish company. They make construction equipment, they make earth-moving equipment, they make trucks, they make buses, they make everything. But their car division is extremely boxy. It's not that they're not luxurious, they're just sold in the 1990s. 1991, the new Volvo 850 platform is soon to come out, and Volvo equals box. But that wasn't enough. Them making boxy cars, I mean, that's fine. They never really needed to change. So, like your car, when it's going up a hill or when it's moving at all, what do you need? You need a squeeze, you need compression. You can have a spark, you can have gasoline, but it's not going to go anywhere unless you have squeeze. And Volvo was under the good old small car company squeeze. A squeeze almost worse than death. Stuff like 2008 financial crash, stuff like that, it's temporary. You know it's going to go away. You just reorganize, you downsize, and then hopefully make it through it, and then the company can soar and come up with new ideas once you spend a bunch of money in R&D in like 2015 and then come back. For Volvo, it was worse because it's not going to go away. It's not something out of their control. It's entirely in their control. You see, Volvo was feeling the same thing Saab was feeling at the same time in the late 1990s. The small car squeeze. You can't compete with larger German manufacturers because they have more luxurious cars. You can't get a lot of designers because the small German cars are hiring all the good designers. You can't really come up with new ideas because then you'll lose more market share than you already have, and you don't have a large enough base to buy the new cars, and you're just stuck. And you're essentially left trying to merge with another car company. You have your turn signal on, and no one's letting you in. They tried merging with Renault in the early 1990s. Didn't happen. They tried merging with Saab in the late 1970s. Didn't happen. They tried merging with Mitsubishi in the late 1990s. Did not happen. It was just a very big squeeze. And almost the worst part was Volvo knew this. They were really feeling it. Even the CEO and stuff like that said Volvo is too small to ever survive on its own. It needs to find a buyer. And, well, they found one in the late 1990s, Ford. On January 28, 1990, it was announced that Ford had bought Volvo automobiles for $6.5 billion. And this was what Volvo needed. You can be in a tight squeeze, and then you just explode and then nothing happens. But you need more resources. You need more gasoline for things to actually change. And Ford, they were large, and they had essentially the world's largest stock of gasoline. At this point in our story, we move to a hero, a person to change along with the main character, and that being Volvo. Peter Horbury. Now, he was in Volvo around 1979. He stayed for 6 years, and then he left in the mid-80s to do just other stuff. He worked for Ford, Mercedes, and stuff. And then, in 1991, Volvo called him back. Why? Because they needed him. They realized that the reason why their cars weren't selling and the reason why they weren't competing was not because they were too small, it's because their cars were just not it. They approached him directly to be their new head of design with the specific mission of moving the brand away from its old super boxy image and into a new, cleaner metropolitan idea. They had no idea what that new cleaner, round town composite thing was, but again, that was his job. And boy, did he have some ideas. A year later, at the Paris Motor Show, he came out with the Volvo ECC. Now, when you're doing a large car, like Toyota does this internally and they don't talk about it, but when you're public, you're the head of design and you're essentially changing the company's entire image, you should have a car, which essentially, for executives and stuff, to look at, to inspect the body lines, to expect what it looks like, and to expect the brand image for marketing and stuff like that. And in the Paris Motor Show, he debuted this, the Volvo ECC concept, which was essentially what Volvo would be. Look at what a big, let me just put it side by side here real quick. I mean, look at how wildly different these two cars are. And yet they're like only a few years apart, if that, if even a year apart. And the Volvo ECC, it looks slightly dated. Well, actually, it looks decently modern. It's like a weird EV thing. It's very interesting design. It reminds me of my XC70. There are parts in there that are the exact, like that little headlight thing, the headlight groove with the Volvo groove. That's the same thing as my XC70. It was bold, it was new, and it was very, very different from what Volvo was putting out already. Now, the ECC was nice, but it was never going to go into production. It was essentially just, here's how many things I want modern Volvo to have, and here's how many of them I can put in one singular car for the future of the brand. It wasn't going to be actually made. The single catalyst car, which was used with this new design language on an old, because Volvo's platforms weren't bad, they just looked dated, was the Volvo C70. And here's the crazy part, which proves that Volvo's new identity was definitely in design, not platforms, not technology, because the first generation Volvo C70 was based on the Volvo P80 platform, the same platform which the Volvo 850 was based off. Now, they did have some help from Tom Walkinshaw Racing, but the point is, same underneath overall platform. How crazy is that? And then on from there, things happened. Slowly, the entire lineup got cannibalized by this new design. Chewed up and spit out in this new, interesting 2000s hyper. I remember people, well, at least because I was born in 2005, so I was barely non-existent at this time. My parents were talking about, they're like, yeah, these new Volvos, people were crazy about them. They were doing crash tests. They're like, oh, those look really good. This is a new identity for Volvo. And apparently they were selling decently well. Here's the all-new Volvo S80. You may know the S80. Now it's the S90. Well, now it's nothing because it's discontinued. But it looked extremely different from the Volvo 850, which they were selling before. There was also, with the marketing and strategy and stuff, a new lineup. But that's not the point. Point is, they essentially fully adopted the new design language, and then they would modify it even further. Now, when we're talking about the second generation Volvo C70, here's where Ford played a big part, because it's a Ford Focus. I said it. When Ford came in, Volvo had good platforms already, but they were starting to feel a bit dated. People wanted refined driving. People wanted a lot of modern, new stuff, new ideas to explore. And Ford had it. And, if you drive a Volvo, I'll tell you all the models. Well, most of them were based off of Ford and Ford platforms. Don't feel bad about it, because you want to know what else was based off of Ford platforms? Basically all of Mazda. The platform that Volvo C70, the second generation, which was riding on, which is the Ford Focus. So, see, I find that funny. Like, our cheap cars are so terrible just because the car companies intentionally make them terrible. When great, like the Volvo S40 R design, the 5-cylinder all-wheel drive, that thing was a beast. That shares 90% of its DNA with the Ford Focus. You want to know another car that shares most of its DNA with the Ford Focus? The second generation Mazda 3. So, and you remember, these are not Ford Focuses on disguise. They're pretty much just on the same platform, which is why they're so different. It's not 90%, it's more like 50, it's not window switches and stuff like that. It's just a small car platform. So it's a little bit less than I exaggerated slightly. But when you think, a lot of people look at the S40 and they say, well, that's not a real Volvo, that's based on a Ford platform. A lot of other things, the Mazda Tribute, that's a terrible example. That was just a rebadge. Like the second generation Mazda 3, a car which a lot of people would say is great, was also built on the same platform as the Volvo, S40. So before you knock the Volvo S40 and the V50 and the C70 and the C30 for all being just on a Ford Focus platform, remember, Ford owned a lot of stuff. Well, not really owned. The thing is, the Ford is deceptive. They own shares and stuff. They own a lot of shares of Mazda, and they outright owned Volvo. So a lot of other stuff were on these platforms. Now, without further ado, let's move into the generations of the Volvo C70. Unfortunately, eventually they ended up killing it off, but let's just talk about the generations, some engine options with Volvo's weird 5-cylinder, just stuff like that. You know what I mean? Just the overall generations, lore, and story of the Volvo C70. Alright, so starting off with the first generation Volvo C70. Now, since there's only 2 generations, this is probably going to be one of the shortest generation videos or generation segments I have ever done. So the first generation was made from 1997 to 2005. Now, they stopped making the coupe, like the non-convertible coupe, in around 2002, and it received an update in 2004. Here are the specs. You can zoom in on YouTube if you're interested in those, and just some general photos of the car. It had a really clean interior. It was nice. Now, the interiors from this era were pretty much the same as the old Volvo interiors because they were pretty good, and then the next generation, they're going to get their big update. And I'm sad it only had 2 generations. I think if they're going to bring back an EV, they should bring back this. Now, listen, guys, you're going to say, oh, no, we don't want it as an EV. Well, it's either you get it as an EV or you don't get it at all. I'm sorry. With Volvo and Geely, I mean, they really don't know what they're doing. All right, and now for the second generation. Now, we've got the chart there that tells you everything you really need to know if you really want to know it. But if you don't, here's the basics. So essentially, they got rid of, they did what all smart companies do when you have a coupe and a convertible version. Make a hardtop convertible. So the second generation was sold exclusively as a hardtop convertible. I mean, exclusively, which is a good thing. You know what I mean? Like a really good thing. Like you want a hardtop convertible. That's where it's all at. You know what I mean? Now, it did receive a major facelift in 2010. Before that, you know what I mean? It was just kind of basic. Then after 2010, they gave it the new modern Volvo flair to fit in with stuff like the XC70 and stuff like that. You know, the newer generation of Volvos. Overall, pretty decent vehicle based on the same Ford platform that the Ford Focus was. Pretty decent, nice vehicle until, unfortunately, they killed it off in 2013. I think they should bring it back, but I know they're never going to because Volvo loves to break your car. So with that, let's move on to now you can skip this section if you want to, the last section of the video, which is just the buyer's guide, looking at pamphlets. It's kind of fun, you know what I mean? Like, after all this work and all this editing and all this yada, 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 it's kind of nice to just do a little screen recording and look at some pamphlets and look at some used prices. So let's head over to that. Alright, so without further ado, let's begin. Now here we just look at all the pamphlets from the generations and the pre-facelifts and all that stuff, and then we look at used prices because, you know, if you watch a video like this, it's probably because you've ordered one or your son has one or whatever, so you just want to learn more about it. So here are the pamphlets which shows you, you know, some parts of the interior and stuff. We're starting off with the first, so pre-facelifted first Volvo C70. Now you can see it's different. Like, it is a very, very different vehicle from a lot of other Volvos, you know, during the time. And Volvo, one thing I like to mention is that Volvo's always been weird with trim levels. They've never really been kind of like the trim level king. So here they gave it clear headlights, and that's pretty much really all they did. And they also gave it different taillights. But remember, the convertible already had similar taillights because they just essentially killed off the coupe. So yeah. Essentially, Volvo's always been really bad with trim levels. I don't know what they hate trim. It's like they're the bane of their existence. They like it to feel very custom. Here it actually had a soft top. the later ones had a 3-piece hardtop. But with trim levels, they've always just been the C70 and then the packages and stuff like that, which I think is nice. And the reason why and here's the thing, now they're doing Premier, and they're doing this really weird thing where they essentially have 3 different cars, like, so you have the XC70 Premier, and then the Premier Pro, and then the Showroom, whatever the stupid names they choose, and then you have options and stuff on top of that. And then, the LPT and the HPT, yeah. So, as usual, you know what I mean? Just, I don't know. And the reason why they did that initially was just because, they were a small car company. They didn't have the resources to make 10 different versions of every single car. Like, have you seen the 2015 Toyota Corolla trim levels? They had LE, LE Eco, they had SE, and then they had L, and then all those had like 4 different trim levels under them, like LE Eco Premium, and LE Eco Premium Plus, or whatever. It was just really, it's just convoluted. Volvo is a small car company, so they couldn't do that, and that, for some reason, even today in 2026, that stuck with them. They still don't do a lot of trim levels on their cars, and that's weird. I think they should come up with something. With Toyota, you have LE, XLE, stuff like that. Here's the pre-facelifted version for the second generation. This one I think is actually fine. This isn't I'll show you which one I'll rank them. I'll rank the facelifts and the generations and stuff. But yeah, I really think they should get more, because the thing is, it's not that they don't have trim levels, it's that they don't have a trim level standard. With Toyota, it's understandable. L, you add on more, because we're dumb Americans, you add on more letters and it's nicer. So LE is nicer than L, and XLE is nicer. Here's the facelift version. You see, they just made it look a little bit more like a rabbit, you know what I mean? So you can tell with Volvo, it's just weird. It's just a bunch of fancy words that mean some stuff. And I know a lot of people criticize everything for that, but I'm just saying I think they could tighten it up a little bit. Yeah, they were really going for young people here. And I guess it kind of worked. I would say out of all the hardtop convertibles that were produced in like the 2010s and 2000s, like the Volkswagen EOS, that thing was pretty nice. I think I'd rather drive this out of all of them. They also like to do this, just words and words and words. What makes a moment sensational? Moments are measured in part by their ability to recall a sound, taste, yada, 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 yada. I will say, that is true, though, because there's this smell, like in 2006 Honda Odysseys, like that generation. It's whatever plastic they used on the dashboard. See, I like that little feature, though, like that curly Bart. They would do that a lot with door handles and stuff later on look it up on the Volvo, I think it was the it was the V60 and S60. They did that with the weird little door handles where they curled around. Like that, Volvo's always been very interesting with design. But yeah, so there's the smell of the dashboard, and it's like whenever I sit in one, it's like a childhood again. I smell the burning plastic in the summer heat, and it's like, that's my minivan. Oh, look at this. They do Premier Plus Platinum, the dynamic package. I mean, what are they even talking about? When Greenville's cars, like they're made up Western Motors, when they have better trim levels than, actual cars, that's when it's kind of pretty bad. Now, yeah, just looking back, pretty decent cars. Now let's look at, of course, the good old Volvo 2015, 2005, really the second generation. These guys hold their value really well. A lot of people say Toyota hold their values really well. And the difference is there's perceived value and then there's value. So Volvos hold their perceived value really well, which is the amount of money that it takes to buy one, or at least decently well, depending on the amount of mileage. Toyotas hold their actual value real well. So, they hold their price decently well, but their actual value, like how long they can keep driving, is pretty good. These Volvos, they're fine. Their engines are okay. Some of them are extremely reliable. Some of them are money pits. It just depends. Volvo's now they're starting to tighten up their everything after 2012, I would say, has been extremely reliable and fine. You're not going to have any major reliability issues with a modern day Volvo. Back in the day, though, I don't know if I would really, you know what I mean? I don't know really how much you'd want to test the luck. You also notice how most of these are in Florida and stuff like that. Yeah, these guys did not like the rust. But yeah, and there's a surprising amount of them. There's a surprising non-amount of them. So with that, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you all real soon.